Now we're live. Okay, so I don't know who's watching right now, but anyway, we're live here with Eric Hawkinson, who is also an ESL teacher. Eric, could you introduce yourself a bit?
So yeah, hello. Thanks Brian for inviting me. Sorry for the late delay here and the technical difficulties. My name's Eric Hawkinson. Um, I'm originally from the States in Arizona. I came to Japan. I think when we first met, I think that was way back in like 2003 or something. It's been a long time. I
Yeah.
think yeah, that was when I first came to Japan. The first year that we met was the first year I came to Japan. That was in 2003. I think that's when we met. And I was an exchange student at that time at Kansai. And that I was just coming to learn Japanese, and I became to like it so much. I went back and I graduated, and I came back almost as soon as I could on the JET program. And I've been up here in the northern part of Kyoto Prefecture ever since. That's after I started the JET program. That was 5 years, and I worked in a high school for a while, and now I'm working at a very, very small university in the northern part of the prefecture called Seibi. Um, I used to play sports, don't anymore. I just sit in front of my computer and do work basically these days. But I like to do stuff on the web too, make websites and play games and things like that as a hobby, and socialize and go out and have fun from time to time. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, is this our first time talking in like 12 years?
I think, virtually face to face. I mean, we've had interactions online, I think, throughout that whole time. I mean, I've been, keeping up with you, I guess you could say, through, various social media. But yeah, I think this has been at least like 12 years since we've actually talked.
Ah, long time no see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Do you
So,
remember? Do you remember where that was?
not at all.
I vaguely remember. I don't know if it's the last time we met, but we met a few times through some mutual friends
Hmm.
um, living in Kyoto. But I think maybe the last time we hung out was at the uh, fireworks festival in Osaka.
You remember when that was?
It was in summer. I think it was in August, maybe September, but late August. Late August. Um,
Like
mm,
recently, or how long ago was that?
no, that was when I was an exchange student. So that was like fall. No wait, summer 2004.
Hmm. Yeah, I can't remember seeing or talking to you like face to face or online or anything in any recently. So, okay, so that's what you've been doing with your life. So you're working at a small university now, you said?
Yeah, it's called Seibi University. It's really, really small. It's connected to a high school, which is really huge. And their claim to fame is they have a baseball team that's represented Kyoto at Koshien for like, I don't know, three of the past five times out. So they're big claim to fame. And so you're getting an echo. It's kind of distracting me. Maybe I'm getting audio. Oh, I think that's from the live feed. Never mind.
Yeah, probably. That's usually why I like to have the headset, but it's not working today. I'll try to keep my microphone muted when I'm not talking. Might reduce it.
Oh, thanks. I can sometimes do that, but sometimes it gets distracting when you hear voices coming back to you like that. What was I talking about? Seibi University. Um, yeah, like I said, there's a big high school, very small university, big baseball school. Here at the university, we only have about 300 students. There's about 1,800 at the high school. And the university here, we have only two majors, sports management and medical information technology. So that's like if you want to go work at a hospital but be an administrator, kind of kind of job. So they're doing studying basic computer skills, and at the same time they're studying medical terminology and things like that. So I teach a few classes for them, and my baseball sports management students, they have little to no interest in studying at all, let alone English. So I have two very different, distinct groups of kids that I teach. So, and those students, it's all about trying to get them motivated and actually just study. And it's very low level, but they're very almost over energetic in the classrooms. So,
Is that good or bad?
um, I think it's better than the opposite. I mean, I've taught classes at a couple other universities, and a lot of them check out, if they're not interested, so it's hard to get them motivated. But these guys, even though they're a little, I don't know, they're not very confident in their skills, and therefore it gets them a little less motivated to try very hard. But I mean, they'll come in and they'll talk and joke around, yell in class. They're always using their phones, or I mean, it's either that or it's better than sleeping students, basically.
Well, let me ask you this question because I actually don't have any experience in teaching at like a public education level. Um, how helpful do you think most of the English programs or courses in university are, like in helping Japanese people actually use English?
Well, it depends on who the teacher is, I suppose. Unlike the public schools, primary and secondary in high school, the curriculum is pretty much decided for the most part, but the university gets to decide the curriculum in the classrooms, and I get free reign in my classes, so I get to be creative in that fact. So I'm grateful for that. So I get to, for example, for my sports students, I try to get them learning things that they'll actually be practical for them, and for the medical students, of course, for them too. So I think it's going to be, we try to make it so it's relevant to them and their future. So they're in that fact they're interested, and it's good for them. It's because it's going to be relevant to whatever they're doing in the future. But most of the other classes that I've seen, they're still, it's like that old, in junior high school, the English curriculum is basically geared toward getting a good score on the test to get into a good high school. And in high school, it's geared toward getting a good score on the test to get into college. And unfortunately, many of the times, you want to get into a good position at a good company, so you're still teaching to the TOEIC or the TOEFL test many times in the university. But depends on the university too. I mean, for example, Kyoto Gaida University, they're all about communicative abilities too, but still a lot of especially the more elite schools. I haven't taught there, but I hear they're still teaching for the test. A lot of rote. So.
Yeah, you just said something there that made me think of a question. Could you talk a little bit about like studying for the test versus communicative abilities?
Well, let's see. Studying for the test. Um, it's helpful in a way, but depends on if you. I mean,
Could I clarify that a little more?
for example, yeah. For example, going the other way around, we have some exchange students from China and Korea here at the university, and they're in my English classes. And they come in and they have a lot more communicative abilities than a lot of my Japanese students coming in. And they tell me that not only do they have to score well, but they have to pass these interviews and things like that. So I can tell just by the different students that are coming in and being able just to interact with them that it makes a big difference upon what priorities are put on them when they're in high school and junior high school. Going the other way, looking at Japanese, for example, a lot of the Chinese students coming here, they have to pass the Japanese proficiency exam. And if they are completely concentrated on the proficiency exam, and not only that, they have uh, already the ability to read and write kanji, so they have uh, sort of an advantage on a written test. They can seem like on a test that they're able to communicate and do well at a university, but they come here and they struggle because even though they've studied for the test and they have the grammatical skills to pass the test, they've honed their skills so much to pass the test, they have trouble, outside of that scope to actually, communicate and do things inside the class and interact with their fellow students and things like that on a day-to-day basis. Um, yeah. So I'm still hearing myself. I'm trying very hard to concentrate on what I'm saying, so it's a little bit
Oh,
hard.
sorry. Yeah, I'm turning my mic mute when it's not my turn, so that should reduce any sound coming from my end. But yeah, I've worked at actually a couple schools where when they introduce a new student, they'll provide me with their TOEIC score, and then they'll tell me that the student would like to learn how to speak in a business setting or a business meeting. In which case, I proceed to ignore the TOEIC score and evaluate their communication abilities myself. I've come up with kind of a rough assessment I can do fairly quickly because I haven't found a really good correlation between the two, as you've said. Um, Sometimes people can focus so much on passing the test that they ignore those other skills.
And on the other end of things, we have to try and do the best we can to put students in the best jobs possible when they graduate. And yeah, I've had some companies approach me and say, we want to make sure that they can actually communicate, even though they have a TOEIC score. So they're actually companies are actually finding this out for themselves too, as far as English TOEIC scores, and trying to reach out to universities and trying to figure out some other way to find out, some metric to find out if they can actually, survive in a business setting in English rather than just having their TOEIC score. Especially the companies that have a lot of experience and need English, like the airline companies or travel companies or places where it's, they not necessarily in the business setting where they just need English to communicate via email. They can survive usually if with a good TOEIC score with that. But yeah, that's that aspect too.
So if somebody was watching this, like a Japanese person wanting to study English was watching and said, well, how can I improve my communicative abilities? What suggestion or suggestions would you have?
Well, I usually tell my students to focus on input and output in equal amounts. So you want to take stuff in and then try what you put in, internalize it, and then somehow put it back out in the world in some fashion. It could be, everyone has their own preferred way to do that usually, but I usually like to say, if you want to start with that, start with listening to something in the morning, internalize it. Could be music, whatever you like. Could be watching a TV show. Could be watching news or anything like that. Something you're interested in. Internalize it over the day, and at night, write about it or have a voice journal or something like that, and put it back out in the world. Or, if you're lucky enough to have a conversation partner, after you've internalized some of that, either it could be some new grammar you've learned or some new topic that you've discussed over the day. After it rolls around in your brain a little while, try and put that back out in some fashion, and then keep that cycle going as much as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This made me think of another question, maybe more geared towards people who are new to Japan, teachers who are new to Japan or thinking to come here. Um, Japanese people typically study English throughout junior high school and high school, and very, very often in university. So all total, we're talking about 6, 7, 8, 9 years of
Yeah,
English
could
study.
be
And
10 years. Yeah, well, because now they've even the Ministry of Education even lowered that down to the starting in the fifth grade now, at least
yeah,
for a
yeah,
couple hours a week. Yeah.
that's right. They're bringing that down too. And yet, uh, Japan is pretty notorious for not being able to produce people who can actually speak English. Um, so with all these resources, like what's missing? Why is this still a problem?
Well, yeah, this is like a big topic for ESL teachers, right? um, it's one of the Japan is putting a lot of resources, a lot of thought into speaking English, but yet, especially among the Northern Asian countries, they're constantly on the bottom or close to the bottom as far as uh, competency in English. I think there's a couple reasons for it, not for lack of trying, but one of them is obviously the chance to actually communicate in that language. And another one is the thought process of learning a language for a lot of Japanese people. Um, it's the way that they start to learn the language. It's more. It's the I like to think of it as the differentiation between learning an art or a science or like a math. When I speak to a lot of Japanese people, they feel like they need to internalize what they want to say and make sure it's perfect before it starts to come out of their mouth. And that has to go with the whole aspect of learning grammar in this precise way, almost like learning a math. And if it isn't the correct answer, the equation doesn't work out quite right. They think it's wrong. Whereas, in my opinion, language is more of an art, and getting your communication, your idea, from one brain to another is really the goal. So if it doesn't have to be the exact equation like a math equation, as long as you can make it, you can make a couple of mistakes or say it in a different way, and as long as you get your idea across, you've pretty much done what you needed to do. So that way of thinking, that style of approach to language education is few and far between. I think still, it's changing a little bit, especially with the new generation, younger generation of teachers in elementary and uh, junior high school that have had maybe some abroad experience and things like that too. But that's just my opinion, though. There's a lot of other teachers that would probably disagree with me on that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. In fact, the past few years, I've actually kind of realigned my paradigm into. I was very, very linguistically oriented. Like I've got to help them, unlearn this erroneous grammar and these uh, bad usage of these words until I realized um, a lot of the teaching is stuck on the theory. It's, you know, this is the grammar, this is the framework, these are the word patterns, and once you get these down, you'll be okay. And yet, time and time again, we get students who are doing that, they're focusing on that, and they're not okay. They can't actually produce anything. And I realize we're missing the application. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I like to use the analogy of tennis, where I say, you know, you can read all the books you want on tennis, but when you're there on the court and the ball is flying at you, you've got to be able to respond. You've got to use that racket, even if you don't use it well. As long as you can hit the ball back, we can keep playing. So don't focus on making your swing perfect and your stance perfect, but just hit that ball back, hit that ball back, keep hitting it back to me, keep this ball in the air, um, and then eventually, the theory that you worked on will come out. It'll start coming out.
That kind of goes with almost anything you learn, right? When you first go to school, you start learning a theory on whatever. It could be sociology or psychology or even in the maths. You learn the theory and you think about it so in black and white. You have to use it in the way that you were taught. But really, when you become a master of it, you get to use it in so many different ways. And to use your tennis example, I mean, you learn that you need to hit the ball in a certain way, but if you've played it a few times, maybe you'll make a mistake and if something good happens, you're like, oh, let's try that again, and then you've found a whole new way to use whatever trick shot or whatever you've learned in a book or whatever. So yeah, that goes back to what I said earlier about the input and output. You have to somehow come up with your own way of internalizing and putting it back out somehow, and failing a few times because, like I said before, like if you feel like you're going to make a mistake and you hold yourself back a little bit, you are missing out on uh, some key learning opportunities, I think, to actually expand your knowledge a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about the input output should be 50-50. I find that particularly with my newer students, it's more like 80% input, 20% output, and that's if they're pretty brave. All the time I'll get things like, here's a lexical set, or here's a list of words and expressions and patterns you need for our discussion. And I'll say, do you understand everything? And I'll get, yeah, 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 yeah. I understand everything. I'll say, okay, great. And I'll pick a random word and I'll say, can you make a sentence with that? And I just get a blank stare. And
They can
yeah,
define it, but they don't want to use it out of context or whatever, right?
sure, but yeah, for me, it's like if you want to improve your speaking, what is the point if you can't actually use the words you're learning? Um, so what you said is key. It's like if you're going to take it in, find a way to put it back out. Definitely. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of good strategies yourself about doing that same thing. And 50-50 is might be a little too much. It depends on where you are in the whole learning curve too. So if you're a beginner, it's going to have to be more on the input than the output because you haven't learned enough to put something together to make something substantially long in the output part of things too.
Oh, definitely. I've met a couple ESL teachers who take on this really natural approach. Like, I don't want to use any Japanese whatsoever. I don't want to explain everything. I want them to acquire everything naturally. But particularly beginners do need some kind of framework to start with. They need some kind of basis, and that is, purely input. Um, you really have to be able to gauge your students' level of experience, where they're at, what they can and can't do already. And I don't know about you because you teach groups, but in my case, I can actually gauge like how confident they feel. Do they have a lot of experience in this scenario, talking to a native speaker one-on-one? If not, I prefer to go ahead and give them a little more of the input and the guidance until they build that confidence and feel like, yeah, actually, I can use this language. And as they get more confident, start trying to pull out that output, like, come on, try that, experiment a little more and stuff like that.
It sounds like you do a lot of. I do some of that too, the coaching, but students, one-on-one that come into the office, and I'll help them out questions about what, various things or whatever. But mostly, yeah, I'm teaching in front of a group. But it's almost the same thing. I mean, you try to feel out the class and their general ability, and a bunch of other teachers would, as a motivational stance too. You always want to make their level +1. So you're always the idea is that you find out what their level is, and you're raising it just a hair every time above what the student or that class is. So it's not only good for their learning something new, but it's good for their motivation because they feel like there's still something to strive for at the same time. It's the idea of always just a +1 idea, just always a little bit above what you think the level is. And like you said, you sound like you're always trying to be perceptive about where they're at as far as not only their ability but their confidence and where they're at in the English too. So not only +1 in their ability, but +1 in their willingness to try new things and to fail actually to make mistakes and learn something new. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word coach. There's a guy in Korea who has his own YouTube channel, and he calls himself an English coach. And I kind of feel like my approach is very much like his in that more than trying to deliver the content, like the vocabulary and the grammar, like here's the right word, here's the right grammar, I'm trying to develop the learner. And I'm trying to develop the habits, the characters, the principles of effective learning. So I guess in a sense it is more like coaching than teaching what I do. I'm kind of falsely advertising because if I say I'm a private English coach, what's that? I don't know what that is. But I feel more like a coach or a guide than a teacher per se. You brought something else up, kind of changing the topic here. A lot of Japanese people who want to learn conversation, they have quite a few choices. They can take like a private lesson or a cafe lesson with someone like me. Or of course there's all these eikaiwas, or the English conversation schools, which are usually in groups. So from a teacher's point of view, what's the difference, if anything, between teaching a group and coaching one-on-one?
Well, you said it just in the question itself. There's teaching and coaching. Like I wanted to comment on what you were saying about the coaching, and it has to go with leadership styles too. Like I mean, if you're teaching, you're broadcasting information. It's almost like a one-way directional thing, and coaching is a lot more supportive. It's a lot more feedback. So there's a higher rate of reciprocity with the information, but give and take back and forth, and that's a big difference between teaching groups and teaching individually. You're going back and forth. You're getting feedback in a much higher rate, and especially like the biggest class I've ever taught was probably about 50 some students, and they can go, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks without even having a one-on-one interaction with me, or even get any type of feedback until there could be a student way back in the back of the class that doesn't want to speak at all, and that student's only feedback as far as how they're doing with their English won't come until the final exam, so they won't even know, have any feedback other than the feedback that they might try out with their fellow students in class about any type of comment from my part or from a mentor or coach. So that's a big difference, I think.
So as a teacher, how do you feel about teaching a pretty large size group? Is there any advantage to it, or is it just difficult to do?
Well, here at the university, I've been lucky. They've actually asked me, what's the optimal class size that I want. I mean, I could divide up. We have a small amount of students here at the university anyway, so I don't have to worry about huge classes. But I've taught at other schools where there's so many, you have to squeeze in as many students as possible. But I've come down on a number somewhere between 15 and 20 as a max, and that's just from my personal experience. Having a little more than that, I can't give any individual attention. A little less than that, we can't have group activities and projects and things like that. So it seems to be a good number that I've just kind of come down on over the past couple of years. That seems to be good in the fact that we can have a few minutes during class where I can actually, give some feedback or have a conversation with some of the students every once in a while, or walk around and try to get a feel about if a particular student is having an issue with something, and also giving them a chance to have enough other students in the class to form groups and exchange ideas and do projects and things like that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of backtrack a bit because I actually don't know too much about like your career history. You kind of briefly told me, but how did you get into the job you have now?
Is it kind of a long? I have long version, short version.
Either way, we've got about half an hour. Can you cover it in less than that?
I'll try to do it fairly quick. I mentioned that I grew up in Arizona, and I took a very circuitous route through my undergrad. I actually left the first time I left college the first time without. So I went through up to my third year in college with actually not learning a language, another language. In high school, they let me learn Pascal and COBOL and C+ as my language. But anyway, so I started out in computers and IT, and I left college and I worked for a Microsoft outsourcer for a few years in IT, and I decided to go back to college, and that was at Arizona State, and that was the first time I had to study a foreign language. And everybody studies Spanish in Arizona because we're next to Mexico. It's one of the big things about it. Everybody speaks Spanish in Arizona. So I wanted to do something different. And I was also studying economics. And at the time, unfortunately not anymore, but at that time, Japan was still the #2 economy in the world. So I thought, why not study Japanese? So I came on the study abroad program, and that's where we met the first time in 2003. And still up to that point, I was basically thinking I was going to keep working in IT. But I loved Japan so much when I was here. I came after I graduated. I definitely wanted to come back, so I got on the JET program, which is a teacher exchange program. I'm sure you know about it. And then I started to love teaching. So I started mixing those together over the 5 years. I was a JET assistant English teacher on the JET program. Started mixing kind of the IT stuff and making lesson plans and things like that. And some of the other teachers in the area got notice, and I was given an opportunity to stay after the JET program in high school. And then that led to the job here at the university. And now, as soon as I got a job at the university, I'm like, oh man, I need to get some degrees. So I went back to school again on a distance program, got my master's in educational technology, and now I'm in a program to get my doctorate degree. Going into my second year in that, and that's also in educational technology. So I'm also starting, I'm still an amateur though, so I'm starting on the research end of things, doing some stuff with making e-learning websites and applications, and they've been doing something with augmented reality, making textbooks and games and things like that. If we have time later, I can show you some of the stuff I've been working on. But so it's kind of like a progression: IT, and then love of Japan, and then love of teaching, and then it all just kind of culminates until now.
Yeah, I'm taking some notes here on some stuff that I probably want to bring up later, and that's one of them. Yeah, if we got some time at the end, I definitely want to hear
Cool.
about the sites and applications as well. You said that you came to really enjoy your job, and if we're going to be frank, not all teachers in Japan actually like their jobs or come here to do those jobs specifically. So for you, individually, what do you enjoy about your job most?
I feel like I'm contributing to society and my community and the world. That makes me feel good. I mean, I it's disheartening a lot of the times when you get stuff with administration, and maybe your students don't perform well and test scores go bad. But I think that's a sign of wanting to teach when you're upset, or you get affected by how your students are doing, and that's also kind of a feedback for me. It's like, oh man, this is maybe something that you know I care about, I'm into. So yeah, that's one of the things that kind of gauge me. Like, oh man, this might be something for me because I'm emotionally invested in this whole process. And I think also, like, there's been a lot of, like you mentioned before, like some people come to Japan to teach, but not necessarily to become a teacher. Maybe a working holiday, or they're in Japan. I just read an article recently. I forgot where it was. Maybe it was on Gaijin Pod or something. But they did a survey, and the majority of English teachers in Tokyo are in Japan pursuing their passion, and they're just teaching to pay the bills so they can do their passion on the side. There's nothing really that wrong with that, I don't think. But I don't think I don't think I would have my job now if I didn't have the attitude where I was invested in trying to be a better teacher all the time. I still wouldn't say I'm the best teacher, but I'm in the process, and I feel like this is something that I like to do. I like interacting with my students. I like seeing them succeed, and I like feeling. I think it's not all just for them too. I like the feeling of I'm helping my community. I'm helping society. I'm doing something worthwhile, and that I think that's important to me, and I think that's what drew me to teaching in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. I had a very small group of local teachers who were working in different kinds of schools and things, but I think the one thing that I would say put them above the average teacher was just the fact that they cared, as you mentioned. The fact that they became frustrated, they became disappointed, they came to the group and said, what am I doing wrong, or I don't feel like I'm a good enough teacher yet. Just having that attitude will put you above pretty much the majority of the teachers here already. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's not necessarily a bad thing that people don't want to teach particularly, but it's just something I think maybe students should be aware of. Um, that there may be some teachers out there who are less than invested uh, in your advancement, your progress. And also that if your teacher gets frustrated with you or disappointed with you, it's probably a good thing because it
Hmm.
means they care. So don't
Your
take it too
teacher's
bad.
yelling at you. It's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I've gotten frustrated and I've gotten a little angry maybe at some students, and I hope I hope if they're watching especially, they understand it. It means like I really want you guys to do better, and I'll try to be more patient. I'll work on that.
Well, I mean, it just shows. I mean, if your students are listening, then they obviously know that you care because I mean, if you didn't care, you're like, oh, he's not doing well. You wouldn't affect you very much. And another point on about that is it also really depends on the atmosphere or the support behind a teacher. That's kind of important with that too, because if a teacher cares and if they don't get the right support in the administration or they feel like they're not being rewarded for trying to care or put their students first, that goes back to the whole testing thing that we were talking about earlier. If if a teacher feels like they're trapped, this is happening in the states a lot lately in a lot of different news. So like teachers, there's less teachers going into the profession because one, they feel like they're less respected, and then one, number two, the reason they go into it, they're finding that they can't do that. They can't connect with their students. They can't support them in the ways that they want to. Via they might get a lawsuit on their hands, or they're constricted as far as what they can teach and how they can teach it, or the content they're supposed to be teaching too. So that's a little bit in Japan as well. I mean, a lot of teachers at the university level are relegated to job shopping every year. They can't. Their full-time jobs are few and far between, and so they end up taking 4 or 5 part-time jobs to make ends meet, and they can't be invested in. They're teaching 4 or 5 different schools, and the students are different in every school, so they can't be invested in making new curriculum. They can't put in the time to, give some individual attention to any of the students, even though they might want to, and that discourages a lot of teachers a lot of the times. And then I mean, also like goes to some of the Eikaiwas too. I mean, some of these teachers don't have the support behind them to actually care about their students. It depends on where they are too. So that's another thing for students to think about. Not necessarily their teacher caring, but the people behind them supporting the caring too. That's an also an important thing, I think.
Yeah, you bring up a good point in that even though we're both teachers, we don't quite do the same type of work. I'm self-employed. I basically have my own business, so I don't have administrators or other people in the background to deal with. So if I want to support a student a certain way, that's something I can do. Whereas someone like you who works in the university, or as you mentioned in Eikaiwa, they have certain protocol they're supposed to follow, or certain rules that are in place, or certain constraints. So that leads to a question I wanted to ask you: is what problems do you see currently in English teaching? Could you elaborate on that a little more?
What problems in English teaching? Well, uh, if I had to, there's no one solution to the issue as far as like the issue of just in Japan and the lack of English ability after so many years of learning. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying about how it's taught, and the system is set up in a way to where if you can't, score well on a test, you won't get into. if you don't get into the right junior high school, your life might be ruined because that doesn't get you into the high school and then the university and then the job. So teachers feel enormous pressure from administration, from the parents, from even the students that feel that pressure too to focus on a test. And like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but um, it doesn't. For one, it's not. The students kind of feel that it's not necessarily going to be useful for them in the long run, so therefore it doesn't stay in their necessarily their important long-term memory. So therefore they forget it right away, and then that's why people are still saying this is a pen. Old people when you run into in the taxi. But to fix that, I don't really have a solution right away. I've been working on a bunch of things in my own classes. More games in the classroom, flipped classes where they listen to the lectures on their mobile phones, and when they come in, we do discussions and we try to use the time to elaborate and have some output together. Where they do the input outside of class rather than the rote. What you see in a lot of classrooms in Japan is the chalk and talk type stuff where a teacher will go up on a board and explain a grammar point and point out the words and the meanings of the words, and then their output will be at home just basically doing rote drills on that grammar point. And it's hard to get some real communicative use out of that kind of learning. Maybe that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was curious about, like, you mentioned the problem of administrators or people working behind the teachers not supporting them or constraining them. If maybe you could give me an example of that.
Well, there's an example that happened to me recently, but this is back in the States. I have a cousin. All my family on my dad's side are all teachers. My grandmother's a PE teacher. My grandfather was a shop teacher. My aunt is an art teacher. So my cousin wanted to become a teacher, but she lives in Wisconsin. It's a state in the northern part of the United States. And they just abolished the right for teachers to unionize. And they were also cutting the budget for the universities by something like 25% in that state. And she was in college thinking to become a teacher. And she's seeing all this happen around her, and she had to change her major. She's now going to be a physical therapist because even though her passion and her parents are teachers and her passion is to teach, she feels like it's not going to be, it's not feasible for her. She's not going to be able to do what she wants to do in the long run. And that's just, the overall attitude in general about education. That's in the States. But in Japan, a lot of teachers might complain that, they're teaching, they have to teach, they get restricted by content. And like you said, like when you the coaching, the feedback, right, the back and forth. And when I make classes, I try to leave wiggle room to actually go off topic every once in a while, because that's when you get the most out of the students. When something it's not even the same for every class. It could be something that sparks conversation for a particular topic for a particular group, and that gets people's brain juices going. And so you want to continue with that for a little while longer. Or you want to go off on a tangent on that for a little while longer, and that's where a lot of the good learning happens. And if teachers feel like they get restricted, they can't. We feel our hands are tied when we want to motivate students to go in there, follow their passions, and dig a little deeper into some of the stuff that you see in the world.
Yeah, that's what I would say I probably love most about my job, is that because there isn't a rigid curriculum in place that we have to meet by a certain date. If a student gets some motivation or finds a tangent that they're really interested in, they want to know about, I can do that freely. I do design lessons and plan lessons and have targets in mind, but the joy for me is that I don't have the constraint of, like, I must meet that target by next week because there's a test coming. it's we can meet that target today, we can meet it next week, we can meet it next month. It's totally up to you. Um, so I've tried working with schools, and generally this is my problem. It's use this material, use this methodology, even though this methodology sucks, doesn't work, and get them to do this by this time. And it's like I could do that, but I just my heart wouldn't be in it, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I mean that's exactly what teachers go in to do it because they want to get that like that good feeling. I said, they want to feel like they're inspiring people. They're doing something in for the community. And when you're constricted so much, that becomes hard, and then therefore your desire to teach goes down, and then again that's like a vicious cycle of the whole teaching environment kind of going down at the same time.
So if I was a teacher who was maybe new to Japan, or been thinking to work at the public high school level or the university level, would you have any tips or advice for me?
If you want to work at a university, get your master's. Uh, Start looking at academic journals because teachers, it's hard to get a job at universities without any sort of, if you haven't been published or things like that. So go online and Google Scholar some English papers and find out what people are doing, and maybe try and do a presentation or write a paper, or go to a conference or something, see what people are doing, see what people are into. Um, as far as like becoming a ALT or a Eikaiwa teacher, I mean, just be open-minded, I think would be probably one of the biggest things. If you come with a certain set of expectations, they're not going to be met almost for certain, 100%. So you have to be, there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of dealing with things that you might not expect. So being open, as far as like, especially in the junior high schools, you might have be excited about something that you're going to bring, but you might not be able to use it. You might be told that you might feel like a human tape recorder at sometimes. That's happened to a lot of jets. That goes back to what you were saying earlier about having to do stuff at a certain time. That in my experience in the JET program, I can always tell when the tests are over, because that's when the demand for my classes went to the roof. Because leading up to the tests, I'd be like, yeah, I got this lesson for this chapter you're doing next week, and you're like, no, we have to get through 2 chapters next week. We don't have time for communicative activities, so maybe next week. And then it would happen the next week again because I didn't get through enough material. So that was disappointing for me. And so even when I did enter those classes like that, I found myself sometimes being a human tape recorder, just they wanted to have a sounding board for whatever vocabulary or whatever grammar they're learning at that time. So I couldn't get creative. So I had to, downgrade my expectations and work with the system. But I mean, that goes with a lot of jobs too, right? But a lot of teachers that didn't make it, they get frustrated. They start complaining, and they didn't. It goes with Japanese society too. You have to, bow your head a lot of times when you don't feel like you need to, and you have to just, take criticism when you don't feel like that's right, and you can't. If you want to openly complain, that might be a big deal too in Japan too. So, be open-minded and give some wiggle room to the situation. I think is probably my best advice.
All right, makes sense. Um, Complete change of topic, but how's your Japanese?
It's probably, as far as for the amount of time I've lived here, it's probably horrible. I still get complaints from my fellow teachers here about my horrible Japanese. But daily conversation I get by, and most of my classes I do teach in Japanese, especially to my sports management students. If I conduct my classes in English, I couldn't get through them. Um, yeah, I still can't read a newspaper. I still can't. I still have a very hard time following the news. But um, my Japanese was going up when I was met you. Probably hasn't gotten too much better since then. It seems like it got to a plateau where I'm now functional. I can live. I can get by, and it really hasn't improved much since. And I've always, I don't know, for some reason, my motivation's been to study Japanese ever since I got to that level where I can survive. I can get by. I can go to the, I don't know, um, the post office or whatever, Kabini, whatever, and pay my bills and get by and do small administrative tasks here at the university. I'm the only Westerner here, by the way, so I have to use Japanese every day. But I'm still, in a grad program, and I chose to do it online back in the States, so I'm also speaking more English than I have in a long time too. So, まだまだめっちゃ下手ですよ. It's horrible. I just had a class yesterday, and I had blanked on some simple words too. I'm sure I've heard you speak Japanese back in the day. I'm sure your Japanese is a lot better than mine.
No, I'd pretty much describe it the same way you did. It's considering how long I've been in Japan, it's horrible. Uh, but I basically reached a functional or maybe slightly above functional level and just kind of coasted on that up until now. I actually have an informal project which involves learning Japanese again. So I will be getting back to it because uh, I don't know how long I'll be here. I can't guarantee I'll be here forever. So the window may be closing on my opportunity to really immerse myself.
Oh, you're not a lifer? I thought I took you for someone that wasn't planning on ever going back.
I don't know. I mean, future's open. I don't have any plans to move back, but I think a lot of people tell themselves, a lot of foreigners, I should say, tell themselves that oh, I'll be here another year, another 2 years. I can start next year. I can start in a few months. And then, as you said, in many cases, they're having to renew contracts every year. They can't renew it this year, and oh, well, there goes my window of opportunity. So I don't want to assume I'm going to be here for life and use that as an excuse to keep putting it off. So I've got a project in the works where I'm going to get back to it. But
To learn Japanese?
yeah,
I mean, okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the intention of actually being able to do things I can't do now.
Wow. Yeah, I just I'm trying to get promoted here at work to get more pay, and I have to present all the research that I've done. And one of the big points that they pointed out to me is I don't have N1, and I haven't been published in Japanese, and I need those two things to get promoted, and those two things are still a long ways off for me personally, I think. So.
Right. Wow, that's a pretty tall order. But you do speak quite a bit of Japanese. You said you're functional. So when you were learning, when you were going from like not being able to speak to becoming functional, what do you think was the most helpful thing for you?
Well, when I was studying at Kansai when I met you, were you at the school too, or we met in Osaka, but you weren't at Kansai when we met, right?
No, I never went to university in Japan. So.
Okay. So like I would be going to class every day to study Japanese, but I was living with a host family at the time, and I felt like I learned more with my host family than I ever did at school. And that goes back to what I said before with the output. I learned maybe a few words in class, but I got to try them out at dinner with my house family, and they were teaching me the real, Osaka Ben at home, the language people were actually using, not the textbook language. So that was actually, I felt like I learned a lot more just making friends, and they introduced me to other people, also uh, going on dates and things like that. I feel like I was forced to use my Japanese, and I force myself into situations where I'd have to use it a lot. And I did some small things too, where I kept a small notebook, and a word came up that I didn't know, I'd write it down. these days I'm just using Evernote. You know, if something comes up, and I keep a list of new words. But like I said, when I reach that plateau, I'll learn a new kanji, I'll learn a new word, but one or two will go out the other end, and I'll have to relearn it again at some point. So it takes to get past that plateau. I think it takes a lot of diligent study at home with your head in a book, trying to memorize some kanji and things like that too.
Yeah, they constantly say immersion is the key to really acquiring a language. And um, you mentioned something about taking notes, and I found pretty consistently that my students who come to me with a notebook with questions in hand are the ones who are improving at the best rate. Um, when I have students who come to me like, oh, I don't have any questions today, or and I'll say, oh, did you study English this week? Yeah, I watched some TV shows. Oh, cool. So what words did you pick up, or what expressions did you pick up from those shows? I don't remember. These are the students who are, yeah, they're progressing, but not nearly at the rate, and not nearly as smoothly as the ones who have the notes in hand and they're prepared. They've been actively paying attention to whatever input they're getting. Um, so I think that's something like Japanese people can do
Yeah,
here.
like I said, going back to being able the one-on-one and the coaching, you're getting the feedback constantly. But there's little tricks you can do to give yourself some feedback. You know, you find a word you don't know, you write it down, you look it up, and you project that into maybe the future. And the next time you see it, you're like, oh, that was it. That was what I learned before. And then you contextualize it a little more, and then therefore you're building on your own knowledge. You're gamifying yourself, kind of.
So on that note, I wanted to come back to something you said earlier about the attitude towards making mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
that particularly in junior high school and high school, I think, and probably at the college level as well, there's this frame of a mistake is something you should avoid. You're doing this and you're practicing so that you can speak correctly. And it's this kind of narrow focus that I actually think gets in the way of learning, and you touched on that earlier. Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, like I said, well, there's two things that it's touched on that we touched on before. Is the testing culture, because the test only has one right answer. It's not nuanced. Language is very nuanced. Like I said before, it's more. I think my opinion is more art than science. So I mean, you can't. You can write an equation that maybe feels like poetry, but language is poetry, and then it becomes more like an equation when you boil it down to its constituents and look at the grammar points and things like that. So it's the approach in general I find that's narrowing, get a little more myopic, and not just in language in general. If you, when I first came to Japan, I was kind of shocked when the contrast between giving open-ended questions or assignments that don't have strict rules about how to complete it, that allows for creativity in the students. Like here's the rule, get this done, you can do it however you want. And this is where a lot of Japanese students start to break down because they haven't been, they feel like they need to be instructed on every step of the way, and they're jumping hurdles. They're jumping hurdles because that's where the whole test focus comes in too. And then the same thing happens in language. You're like, okay, I've learned this, now I can move on to this step and this step and this step. And for a lot of things, that's great. I mean, we talk about poor language scores, but you talk about math scores. Japan's doing still fantastic, right? So it depends, but that goes again to what we were saying before about having teachers being able to bring out the best in their students. If a student is more inclined to go off tangent with their language skills and wanting to try new things, willing to fail on that, being able to support that, and not being able to hey, come on, we got this test over here, we got to curve you back this way. If there's more focus, not necessarily focus on it, but there's more leeway for that to happen somehow. Then again, I don't really have the answers of how that might look and how that might happen. But I think that might help with that whole myopic type, uh, no mistakes type thinking process that we see a lot in the schools.
Yeah, but the solution to that problem is probably way beyond the scope of our hangout today. That's a whole topic in itself. Um, but yeah, one of the duties I feel I have is to unteach or unlearn a lot of what students pick up while they're going to school. And one of those is that dichotomy of like either the English I'm producing is right or it's wrong. And I have to instill in the sense that actually there's a spectrum. Um, there's a bunch of stuff that fits into this is correct, and there's a bunch of stuff that fits into this is incorrect. And there's even a bunch of stuff that fits into this is wrong, but it works. And if your goal is to, go to Hawaii on vacation and be able to communicate, a lot of that stuff that falls into that incorrect realm is fine. In fact, it's better than a lot of this stuff if this stuff is going to take you like a minute to produce. And these are kind of new attitudes that probably take up like 50% of the work when I'm first starting with somebody. But it's that attitude that comes across in the question, like they say something and immediately say, "Is that correct?"
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I have to, say, wait, let's reframe this in a way so we ask a better question about what we're trying to accomplish here. Oh, go ahead. Look like you want to say something.
Well, I mean, there's two things now. The one thing when you're doing that, I wanted to, because when you're coaching, I used to have the attitude where I was always correcting my students. Like if they made a mistake, I would just chime in with the right word, and then they immediately correct what they've said and keep moving on. But recently, if I understand what they're saying, I've kind of let them gloss over that, and I'm to the point where sometimes I even get pushback from some of my students to like, why didn't you correct me on this? I'm like, well, I understood what you were trying to say, so I didn't want to. I wanted to let you get out what you wanted to say without any feedback from me because you were inside of your own thought process. So I wanted to get your like where you stood on that. Like, are you always correcting them, or are you?
You see me nodding my head over here, and that's because I had quite a paradigm shift recently, where a couple of years ago I started looking at what is linguistics and what findings and discoveries that people had and what are they learning, all this sort of thing, and sociolinguistics as well. And I picked up that I have been focusing way too much on the linguistic component of like, you said that wrong, let me correct you. You said this wrong, let me correct you. And I've realized that this is just kind of encouraging that mindset of like, if I analyze things correctly and get the correct answer, then I can speak. And I actually don't want to. I want my students to communicate. I want them to be happy and enjoy just communicating what they're trying to communicate successfully and smoothly without stress. And the more that they get stuck in their head, the more they prevent themselves from experimenting and figuring things out and developing that attitude that's going to help them be better speakers. Because that's the goal. The goal, both explicitly and implicitly, the goal is not to speak correctly. The goal is just to say something and have the other person understand. And that's it. And it hit me that they don't have to speak correctly every time to do that. So now I'm really more focused on, rather than trying to find out if that was right or wrong, just figure out if I understood it. And if I understood it, let's go from there. Keep trying it and keep trying it. Yeah. So I'm a little more focused on the let's experiment, let's experience this side, rather than let's think about this and let's figure out if it was right or wrong, if it ticks the box, if it gets the circle.
Because if you keep feeding that kind of thing where you're correcting them, sometimes they're even like kind of leaning into it. They feel like they're making a mistake, and then they'll pause and see maybe if that was okay, kind of thing. So it kind of even begins to interrupt their own process of trying to get out what they need to say. But on the other end of things, they'll come back and say, you let me make a mistake and you didn't correct me on that. And so I was in, like, maybe like a student maybe might have to go to an interview or something the next day or something. And then you have to be a little more careful about it. But
Sure, sure. Yeah, I don't want to disparage the thinking, the analyzing, the conceptualizing. It is really important to think about your English and try to improve it and try to use um, correct grammar and correct vocabulary as often as possible. But that's just half of the picture. The other half should be, you know, you do also have to experiment with it and experience what it's like to use it and get used to that to build a confidence uh, that they'll kind of complement each other. But yeah, I was way focused on the theory and the accuracy and making sure the English was correct, and I think it was a mistake.
no, I mean it's good to know that stuff. I know because I've been halfway following what you've been doing, on social media, and I noticed. I think maybe it was like 2, 3 years ago that you were posting a lot of stuff about very minute, very difficult grammar points, and I'm, man, this guy's getting deep into it. Like, um, good on you, because I never really had that deep focus on it. I've got my master's but it hasn't been focused on English at all. It's always been about learning design, curriculum design kind of things. So I never, I should be. I wish I was a little more, focused on some of the grammar sometimes and the minute uh, details of the linguistics involved with it. But that's something I might do in the future, though. But yeah, I think it's still important though to know it at least.
The difference being that I think the majority, if not all of your students, are pretty beginner level.
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah, and I've got quite a range. I have students who can't even introduce themselves, all the way up to students who are translators and interpreters. So some of those blog posts come from those students, the ones who they've got the fundamentals down, and they can hold their own in a conversation, but they really want to get deep into the language. So they kind of motivate me to figure that stuff out. Yeah. So.
Some of those questions are really hard. They're really trying to figure out the nuance between different parts of the language, and when you're a native speaker, you don't even think about that stuff at all. So it's hard. It's hard to explain it, even though you've been speaking it your whole life. Yeah, you have to look at it from another language to actually think about it in that way sometimes.
If I can go off on a little pet peeve I have, and this would be kind of couched as advice to people who want to teach ESL, don't pretend you understand something. Don't pretend that you understand a nuance. Just be honest with your student. If your student asks you, like, what's the difference between saying you could go to Osaka Castle if you want to check out the culture here, and you should go to Osaka Castle. When you're giving advice, you could say, you could do this, you could do that, or you could also say, I recommend this and that. If you don't know the difference, just tell your student, I don't know. I'll look into it, and I'll get back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were talking about letting your students make mistakes, and if you as a teacher, this is another thing in Japan. Teachers feel like they always need to be in authority.
Yeah.
Well, not all the time, but most of the time, they feel like they need to be not only an authority in a discipline sense in the classroom, but an authority in knowledge. So the teacher can't show that they themselves can't make mistakes. And I think that's a mistake in itself, because if you're trying to encourage students to make the mistakes and not be that myopic what we were talking about earlier, you need to be the kind of teacher that allows yourself to make mistakes in front of your students and allows yourself to be like, well, we're all learning together, even though I'm the sensei here and you're the senpai, or I'm sorry, the kohai, or whatever, the student. We're still all learning. We all don't know everything, especially in this age of technology where you can Google it in 5 seconds, and that's where some of these teachers are having lashes against phones in the classroom because the teacher doesn't want to know doesn't want the students to know that they're wrong, and they're Googling it in class and saying, I just looked it up, and they're like, no, no phones in class. You can't. I am the authority here. So that's a big thing. Yeah, you don't. To be able to say I don't know is a big thing, I think, and I do it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just I used to teach in cafes, and very, very often I would hear a student ask a pretty challenging question to the teacher, and the teacher would just make something up on the spot. It would sound almost totally random, like, what's the difference between I will do this and I'm going to do this? Oh, if you say I will do this, it means you have a very strong intention. And the student is sitting there from the point of view of, well, this guy's a native speaker, so he must know what he's talking about.
He
And
sounds confident in what he's saying, yeah, or she's saying, yeah.
yeah, and as you said, they feel obligated to take on that role of like, I got to be the person in the position who knows everything. And so from that, I took away very quickly. If you don't know for sure, just tell your student, like, I'm not sure. I'll look into that. That's a really good question. The students often get, my students often get a kind of maybe narcissistic pleasure out of like, oh, I stumped my teacher. So I found they actually enjoy that. Um, Yeah,
I mean,
so to sum that up, yeah, don't pretend you don't know something if you don't. As you just said, Eric, we're all learning this together. Every year, I figure out something new about teaching, about education, about learning, about my own language. Um, just yesterday, I had a question that stumped me. I had to sit there and think about it, and actually, I had to get back to the student. Um, it was a text where somebody said something, and the person said, "Oh, are you?" And then the person said something else, and they said, "Did you now?" And she said, "Why did they say now?" And I was like,
it's
"I have no
just
idea."
just a
Yeah,
set phrase, really, but isn't it? Did
what's
you?
that?
Just kind of a set phrase, though, isn't it? In that case, did you know?
Well, you could take out now, and it would mean the same thing. Like I broke up with my girlfriend. Oh, did you? I broke up with my girlfriend. Oh, did you now? And it adds something to it. And I said, I can't figure this out. So I had to tell her, like, give me a minute. Let me let me look into this. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not apparent, and it's not obvious to us what that adds, but it's intuitive to us that it adds something. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
that
so
would that would take me a little time to reflect on that too. That's a hard one. Did you know? Now you
yeah,
got me thinking about it.
but it adds the how do I put it? It makes it clear and explicit that the listener is intrigued or surprised by this information. Whereas "did you" doesn't necessarily mean that.
Yeah, did you now is more like it's got an element of surprise, and it's a confirmation almost.
Oh, sorry. It can also be and add the nuance of dubiousness, or sorry, incredulity. Like I'm not really sure I believe you,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of similar to that. I'm surprised. That didn't just come to me. I had to sit there and think about it and kind of look for some examples and stuff and put it together. This is another element of why I love my job is I'm learning lots of stuff about my own language.
Hmm.
So, cool. I'm about to wrap up. I don't know if anybody's actually watching, but just in case, I'm going to put up the Q&A. So if anybody wants to ask us any questions, oh, they're having technical difficulties. So,
Oh, that's me. I think I put that in there.
oh, okay.
That was before we got going. We started a little bit late today, so I put that in.
Oh, that's you. Yeah, it says Eric Hodgson underneath. But just in case anybody's watching, they can throw a question. But I have one more question I prepared for you, and that's you said you're working on some projects
Hmm.
and you wanted to share that. So could you share that with us?
Sure. I got a bunch. Let's see, maybe I can share my screen. Sorry, just 1 second. So I started working at university a while back. Can you see that? Is that working?
I just saw a black screen.
How's that?
Ah, okay, now I can see a website. Yeah, it says Forever.
Yes. So that's one of them. I got my website here. That's erichawkinson.com, and you can see all my projects I've listed here. There's basically three of them. I
Cool.
got I got one is the Together Learning Center and the Team Teachers, or Forever Kyoto and Team Teachers. So, like I said, I had a background in IT, so I've been kind of testing out different e-learning systems and things like that. Uh, so, game-based learning, some ideas like that, and it's a website and application. And when I start, the Forever Kyoto is when I started here at the university. They had a school of tourism. They don't anymore, and they asked me to start doing some research and helping the community out with getting information about the local tourist attractions in English. So I started this website and this page to not only advertise some of the inaka, some of the countryside of Japan for tourists to get out of the city, but also to kind of analyze and do research on how tourists are finding information about Japan. And that's also a website and application. And Team Teachers was something I started on the JET program for teachers to exchange um, materials that they make for their students.
Hmm.
I made it for the JET program, but nobody used it. But it got, for some reason, it got really popular in South America. So uh, that's actually down right now. I migrated servers, but I'll have that up pretty soon. And some other things. Let me turn this off for a second.
So this is on the same website that's in your that's showing up on your screen right now, right?
Yep, that's all on the. Sorry, that's all on the erichawkinson.com. And I published my first textbook recently.
Oh, cool. One with English level one.
Yep.
Communication. Ah, so is that like a communicative skills
Yep. It's
textbook?
based. It's a textbook based on communication. Starts from zero, level one. I used it for my baseball students. Um, there's 15 lessons in it, and it's each lesson is based on a grammar point, but it just introduced a grammar point as a toolbox, and then from there it's got a bunch of discussion activities and games and things like that to do. And what I've been using this for is for another project of mine called Orientation, and I've been working with augmented reality. Have you ever used augmented reality?
I have no idea what that is.
So that is augmented reality. Have you heard of virtual reality?
Sure.
So virtual reality is a completely simulated environment, like playing a video game or something like that. Augmented reality has to use something from the real world. So what I did is I created an app with the textbook I just showed you, and you take that app and it uses the camera, and you put the camera over parts of the textbook. It could be an illustration or something, and video will pop up related to whatever that's being discussed in the textbook, or if there's a dialogue in the book, you can hear what that dialogue sounds like, or if there's a grammar point, it'll link out to a vocabulary quiz or something on the web. And I've been using that also. I've also been involved with TED. Are you familiar with TED at all?
Oh yeah.
So I use a lot of their videos in class too. It's good. It's like something like 30,000 TED Talks now online. I've recently made a class completely based on TED Talks. I'm going to start using that in April. Anyway, I use this at TED too for a kind of like an informal learning environment. So people use this app and they go around to different posters and it pops up different information. You can use this to make a quest or a game. People go around and kind of explore the area with this app and look at different things, and different information will pop up to tell them to do different things in different ways. So this is like kind of been my pet project and kind of my research topic, I guess, as of late.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a new thing, though. Technology is not perfect quite yet, but I think it's something as we move to the future. Because we talk about testing, and I think this technology is actually pushing testing to the side, because you can't really test for facts anymore, because if you're going to have something like Google Glass or all the information being able to be found on your phone, you don't really need to know the facts anymore. Like just, I mean, 10 years ago we needed to memorize our friend's phone number, but we don't need to do that anymore. But in the future it's going to be, we could just ask our phone any question. We can maybe even have it translate stuff for us on the fly. So we need to contextualize the test too, so we can't really just say, you know, what's A plus B, because people can look that up. We need to be able to have some sort of a challenge, or being able to use that information creatively and in new ways. So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. So those, yeah. One other thing I'd like to share with you, if we have time.
Oh yeah, sure. Take your time.
Let's see here. Turn that off. I like games. I like using games in class. I like making games. You ever make games for your students?
Occasionally.
I made a bunch of games, but one in particular that I've been working with is called American Citizenship, and it's a board game. So to go through the naturalization process in the States, one of the last steps is having an interview. And in that interview, you get asked questions about American civics, history, and government. And playing this board game will help you prepare for that interview. And I've been trying this out on some students to see if it's helped them, and if this type of approach to learning is actually helpful. And one of the things that goes along with what we were talking about today, between testing and being able to teach for the communicative skill. Like, so the immigration office actually gives you the 100 questions that they'll take 15 from for the interview, and you can study those questions, and you might know all the answers, but during the interview, if you don't have the confidence of communication, you still might mess up, even though you might know all the answers. So playing this game actually makes you practice and use that information in the way that you might use it in the interview. The only thing is you can't really, I mean, you can post-test for the information afterwards, but the test is actually the interview itself, right? So kind of goes along with that.
So it's basically a simulated interview.
Kinda. I mean, they're all. It's a competition. People are playing against each other, but every challenge in it involves talking to the rest of the players in the game. So it's like brainstormed a bunch of different ways to ask a question without actually asking the question. So it's not necessarily just a quiz game where you pick up a card and ask that question per se. Some of them are like that, but I tried to make it as interesting. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm interested in, this game-based learning, challenge-based learning, project-based learning, because that's where I think we're moving towards in the future. So not necessarily just regurgitating facts and grammar points, it's being able to take that knowledge and applying it in some complicated or nuanced way. If anybody wants to know about any of those projects, you can just find that on my website, or you can contact me from that website. All my information, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff's on that website. So if anyone out there is interested, wants to learn more, please get a hold of me. And if you want to collaborate on any of that stuff in the future too, Brian, please.
It looks like some pretty heavy-duty stuff. I wanted to ask actually about the augmented reality. How long do you think that's going to take? It looks like a very long-term project.
Well, I already have prototypes in use right now. It's not really in education. It's already being used in I don't know, cursory sense, a light sense, but I hope to have this app out for this textbook but within the next year. And then I mean, you can use it. It's used a lot in tourism now. That's where I first found it.
Ah,
So I'm actually working with the city on using augmented reality for the tourism auspice here. I work with them quite a bit. So let's say there's a poster about an event or something in the area, but it's in Japanese, of course. So if you load up this augmented reality app and you put the camera up, it'll recognize the image from the poster, and then it'll give you information in English, or at the very least link you out to something on the web that gives you information in your language about that particular topic. So it's very useful in tourism as well. Because augmented reality could be just your GPS location too, something from the real world that you're using to put into a game or something like that. That goes with the GPS gaming too, like Foursquare. That's an older one, or Ingress is a popular one from Google. That's a GPS game. They're starting to use that in tourism too.
okay. And is your TED Talk on YouTube or is it online somewhere?
I don't have a TED Talk. I've never been. I've auditioned 3 times now. But this is how I got involved with TED. 3 years ago, I auditioned. I was a finalist. I went down and I spoke as an auditioner, but I didn't make it to the big show. TEDx Kyoto is huge. There's 800 people that go there every year. It's one of the biggest in Japan. So the competition to get on that is quite fierce. But I met some of the people there, and I love TED as a whole, as an organization, and the people there are so open-minded and positive thinking and helpful, and they're all so interesting to entrepreneurs and teachers and lawyers. And so I just started getting more and more involved up until last year, when I approached the organizer with my idea to do the augmented reality stuff, and with all the participants, they jumped on it, so I became kind of like a team leader. So now, was it 2 weeks, next week, I'm going to Canada for TED Active, which is like the global thing, because TED as a whole organization is taking notice of this augmented reality stuff, and they want me to go and share that with all the TEDx organizers all over the world. So I'm really excited about that.
Busy man.
Nah.
Thanks for making time out to do this hangout.
Oh man, Brian, sometime I want to catch up and, in a more informal sense, and see what's
Yeah,
going
that's
on.
my last question for you. When are you coming to Osaka? You know Osaka better.
What part of Osaka are you in again?
I'm in downtown. I live in Namba now.
Okay, wow. I'm
Excuse
I'm in
me.
Osaka. I don't know. Actually, I'm going to be in Osaka at the end of the month. I'm presenting at a conference there. If you're interested, we're going to be speaking about the TED stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe afterwards, like, we can meet up for a drink or two.
What
And
day of the week is that?
look at my calendar.
All this stuff's going live too.
Oh, sorry.
Now,
It's
now you're committed.
end of the month. So the conference is the International Academic Forum for International Development with Education, and it's in Osaka, March 29th, 30th, 31st, and April 1st. So somewhere I'm presenting 2 times sometime during those 4 days, and I'm probably at the conference at least 3 of those 4 days. So I'll be in Osaka at pretty much the last 3 days of the month.
Okay, those are weekdays, so it pretty much just depends on my schedule, but I'm sure at least one of those for at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Time.
And yeah, catch up the last 12 years.
Yeah, we're going to need more than an hour for that, maybe. Cool. Well, really good to see you again, Eric. Thanks a lot for taking out the time and hanging out.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being a passionate teacher and doing things like this to try and improve everyone else, improve yourself. I mean, I think it's important. So.
Yeah, I can't help it. I love it. I love this stuff. It's fun.
Yeah, I like it too.
All right, so yeah, I hope we get a chance to meet up at the end of the month. And if there's anything I can help you out with, talked about your projects and stuff, let me know.
If any of that stuff interests you, and if you want to be a part of TED, looking to expand the team. So if any of that stuff you want to get into, you're more than welcome, buddy.
Yeah, tell me more about it. I'll let you know.
Cool.
Okay, peace. Have a good day.
You too.